All right, so part two of today's lecture, I will focus on the readings that you have done for today. You've read Ceremony, and also you should have read Through Defining the Anthropocene, a paper by Mark Maslin and Simon Lewis. You should also, by this point, have read through to the section that ends with the sentence, "Not even old-time witches killed like that," which is on approximately page 37, location 699 in the Kindle edition. For next Thursday, please note that you need to continue reading to the section that ends with the sentence, "Emo was asking for it." That's about page 53, location 905. All right, we need to keep reading so we get through this novel. It's not that long, but it's not that short either, and you've got to keep up. So keep reading, and we'll find occasion on Thursday to cover some of what we've read together. As you know, too, I've given you the job of pursuing one of these research threads in your group work, and I'll be posting a couple of videos pertaining to that. So let's talk now about Ceremony and then about Lewis and Maslin's Defining the Anthropocene. Okay, so as we read through this novel, I want you to remember that your Kindle formatting is not precisely correct. You can see here how this section ends, and that the page formatting is quite different. "They were starving" is on its own line, and you get these interestingly rendered poems that alternate with the prose sections throughout the text. I'll remind you of that as we go, and sometimes it actually makes a difference to how we might read this novel. As for the actual content, we have the alternation of this mythical, or you could say oral tradition timeline, where we get old stories that are part of the Laguna Pueblo people's lore and knowledge store, their wisdom tradition, just like we think of Taoism, say, as being part of China's cultural heritage, and Taoist concepts in some ways still being relevant today. Or if we think about the West, so-called West, and we think about the heritage of Greek and Roman gods and goddesses, and the Bible, right? All of these give us a rich store of stories and concepts that we still use today, that we often modify so that they make sense with what we maybe have learned or understand differently, scientifically or otherwise. So don't look at these passages here just as something to read through quickly, or that, in some sense, don't make sense. Pay very close attention to them. We'll be thinking about, in many instances, how they might connect to the question of the Anthropocene. After all, when we leave off with Tayo here, he's damned the rain. He believes, in his kind of battle-fatigued, post-traumatic stress state, that he has prayed the rain away, and that he is responsible for this drought that is afflicting the people back on the Laguna Pueblo in New Mexico. And this is not something that is new to the people, right? This story from the past tells the story of previous droughts, when it hasn't rained for a long time, and the effect. Everything dries up, everything blows away, people are thirsty, people are starving. Well, these can be changes and shifts in patterns of climate and weather. So it is a kind of climate change. The climate is always changing, and weather alternates and moves within that larger shift of climate. So we are thinking about climate. We're thinking about, too, even just conceptually, the idea that one's action, right, whether you pray the rain away or you do something else, could be connected, interconnected to larger effects, right? So we'll continue to pull this thread throughout the novel. The idea that each and every one of us acts and thinks and believes in ways. We tell and enact stories that have some effect, and that aren't just our own isolated story, but affect those stories and people around us, and that cumulatively something small, seemingly insignificant, might have a big effect. So that's something to keep in mind as we move forward. All right, let's get into the actual narrative and some of these characters. I think this is fairly straightforward. Tayo is at an isolated place on the reservation in the kind of desert and scrub, right? The very dry land. And he's tending to some sheep. He's also got a goat, and a little place to stay. And one of his friends comes along, a man named Harley, who was also a soldier in World War II, and who also suffers in his own way a kind of negative effect from the war, and also from the conditions of his everyday life. Remember, there's a lot of anti-Native or Indian racism in the United States historically and in this novel. So the Pueblo people here are living on a reservation. The good land has been taken away from them in many instances, and they're doing their best with what they have. But as a part of the long history of the colonization of the United States, they've been dispossessed of much of the best of the land, which has gone to, as we will see later, ranchers largely, and other commercial enterprises dominated by European descendants or white people, if you prefer. And we'll talk about whiteness and what the white people do in this novel in ways that connect to a lot of things a lot of people are talking about today with regard to race and racialization of different groups of people. So Tayo and Harley go into they go off, right, on this burro, which is a donkey, right? And they're going to go get some beer. They're going to go get drunk. This is a problem that Harley has, and Tayo, he's going along with it. He doesn't know what to do. He's still recovering from his bad case of PTSD. And in fact, at one point, he has a flashback. He passes out on the burro, and Harley says, "Oh, heat stroke," right? But we can see in the novel that Tayo's also suffering from some kind of flashback. We also get more of the story of what happened back in Los Angeles when he was in the army hospital and when he was released, right? He had felt like white smoke. He felt insubstantial. He was frequently thinking about Rocky and crying. When he left, he felt very weak, and he collapsed on the train platform. And he is helped by Japanese women and a child who ask him if he's sick. Take note of this. The Japanese, of course, play a very important role in the novel. Tayo, as an American soldier, was fighting the Japanese in the Pacific, in the Philippines, and he was taken prisoner by them. In fact, he asks someone who had then come to help afterwards, a white man, these people, he pointed in the direction of the women and children, I thought they locked them up. Oh, that was some years back, right after Pearl Harbor. This refers to an actual historical period in the United States when the U.S. government rounded up Japanese Americans and put them in detention camps, a little bit like the Chinese governments put a lot of Xinjiang people in Uyghurs in detention camps, or the U.S. government historically has put a lot of Native people on reservations, which function a lot like long-term concentration camps. So this means of controlling people based on ethnicity or race, and an assumption on the part of the government regarding whether or not these people can be trusted members of that nation state, that national community. Right, so we have this reference here to that historical event. Keep an eye on this kind of thing in the novel. Later in the novel, you'll see that the Japanese come back, right? and that Tayo, who here thinks they should be locked up just because he's experienced them as enemies, has to learn to think about them differently in order to heal from his trauma. Moving forward, we then also move into what happened when he came back. He was picked up by his uncle Josiah and his aunt, the auntie, and he goes back to stay with them and the grandmother. And he's back home. Rocky is now dead, and he's trying to heal, and he's not healing up very well, right? We get some flashbacks and background about his youth, right? Growing up and losing faith in the stories of the Laguna people, as he's taught at school not to believe in that kind of nonsense, right? But he's experienced something now of the world of the doctors and of modern, medicine, and it hasn't really helped him. Something that the grandmother recognizes later when she insists that he see this medicine man named Kuush. That's at the end of the section that you were to read for today. We get more background, a lot of this stuff that I know you've read and need to think about. We get a lot of background on Kuush. Not a lot, but we get a little bit. The auntie doesn't trust it. She doesn't think that people will approve if this Laguna medicine man, and a medicine man is like, somebody who knows the herbs and the kinds of things you can find in the natural world that you can give as medicine. But in the culture too of the Laguna Pueblo people and other native peoples, is a wise man who's also a bit of you could say, spiritual leader, and we could even say who is the keeper of that tribe's that people's worldview or philosophy, right? So the stories and the concepts that hold their worldview together. So Kuush here comes to help in ways that the white doctors haven't been able to. I'm going to start another video and talk a little bit about the scene with Kuush next. So this is the end of this first part of today's lecture on ceremony.